Hey guys, Ladylocks here, and today I have a Masterlock 570, and I wanted to talk to you guys about picking spool pins, specifically how to pick spool pins, and this lock was kind of the perfect one for that because it is full of spool pins. And this one is quite a difficult lock to pick, and if you're just starting into picking spool pins, this is probably not a good one to choose first. And I will show you why in a little bit, but I just wanted to read you the packaging that it came with. The Masterlock gives this one a 5 out of 10 security level rating. Okay, so the back of it, listing all the features, it says cut resistant 7mm hardened steel shackle, solid aluminum body, is strong and durable and resists corrosion, ball bearing locking for maximum hammer and pry resistance, and 5-pin cylinder for maximum pick resistance. Then it just goes to show a little picture of the lock. Yeah, it was not that not that not that easy to pick up on once you first open it up and try to pick it. That's for sure. It took a lot of work to get this one figured out, and the best approach to it figured out. Now, if I got another one, I might be able to approach it and pick it rather easily now that I know how to do it. But when I first got it and tried it, I had to really come up with a plan of attack on this one. And I think it's because it contains so many spool pins. I don't think it has even one standard pin in it. I could be wrong, but it just really feels as though, if I had to guess, I would say it's all spool pins. So anyways, let's get this up in the vise and take a look at it. But first I want to show you, it does have the dead core and the dead shackle, meaning when I turn the key, it doesn't snap back, it stays put. There's no spring resistance for the core, and I have to pull the shackle in order for that to open, so there's no spring in the shackle either. All right, here's the bitting of the key for this one, and here is the keyway. See if it's coming in clear. Whoops, there you go. So not a bad keyway, but there really is no room for a bottom of a keyway tensioner. If you look at how far down the first pin hangs down, if I put a bottom of keyway tensioner in this one, that would leave me basically no room between my tensioner and that first pin. So I do have to use top of keyway for this. All right, aimed a little better there. Okay. So let's double check that the key is still. All right. Okay, so with this one, I did use top of keyway tension. And the first thing you want to notice is, obviously, it is the dead core. So when you do apply tension, if you take your tensioner out, the core stays turned. So if you should have an accident where your tensioner falls out while you're picking this one, it's not a big deal as long as you don't counter rotate on the way out, on the way of the tensioner flying out. As long as you didn't counter rotate the lock, it should be fine to pick up right where you left off. And I'm going to use just a standard hook for this, so let me locate one. All right, let's see here. This one looks pretty good. All right, so I wanted to show you the very first thing I noticed when picking this one was that this first pin doesn't move at all. I cannot get it to set. I can't get it to counter rotate very far in order to get it to set. It's just so stuck in here. And that was the first thing I noticed. And so I had to come up with a way to pick this without picking the very first binding pin that binds the hardest. Because normally when you're picking a lock, you want to pick the pin that is binding the hardest. And that is what you want to follow when you're picking. But when you come across something like this where you cannot pick that pin, you have to kind of improvise. And it's okay to pick just another binding pin as long as there are other binding pins to pick. So if there wasn't any other pin to pick like if I couldn't get this first pin picked and there was no other binding ones, I would really have to figure out a different approach to picking this lock. But as it is, there are other binding pins in this lock, so I am able to just go ahead and pick a different one. Now, before I go into how to pick this, I want to talk a couple seconds about what a spool pin actually looks like. So a spool pin looks like a spool. They call it a spool pin because it's kind of shaped like a spool of thread. So you've got a very fat top, a very skinny in the middle, and then very fat at the bottom again. And it looks like a spool, so it is definitely kind of separate. I'm sure you guys know what a spool pin looks like, but I will put a picture of one here just to, you know, let you guys see that. All right. And so when you're picking this, some of these pins are going to be where the fat part at the top of the spool, the fat top part is going to be at the shear line. Some you're going to pick where the skinny middle part is going to be at the shear line. And sometimes you will find some that the bottom part of the spool is at the shear line. That is why you just never know basically how many clicks you're going to get out of a spool pin. Okay guys, there are a couple of things to note when picking spool pins. So you might be picking along and suddenly your tension bar moves like you might have gotten your lock open, but then all of a sudden it stops. And that movement is called a false set. So it would look something like if your tension was here and then you picked a pin and suddenly it fell right here, but it didn't go any farther. That could be considered a false set. When you're in a false set, that means that somewhere in your pins that you have the middle part of a spool that is at the shear line. So you're sitting on the middle part of a spool. And what's going to happen then is you're going to be picking and you're going to feel some counter rotation, and the counter rotation is going to look like this. All right. And when you find something that counter rotates, you want to click it, and then you're hopefully either going to fall back into your false set or your lock is going to come open. So just going through, I'm going to try to find something that counter rotates and try to set it and see what happens. And in this lock in particular, there are several things that counter rotate. So you just have to kind of pick one and then, you know, keep moving. So let's see what we've got here. All right. So you heard the click and we fell right back into our false set. And now coming back to the front, see if that has gotten us anything else. All right, and since the lock's not open, that just means there's more pins to set. So again, gonna look for something that's counter rotating. And we're gonna try to pick that pin and hopefully we'll fall back into our false set. There we go. And another one. And hopefully we can get this one open. So you're just going to repeat the process. You're going to get into a false set until you pick it and it opens. All right. And those are basically the different things that'll happen when picking spool pins. You're either going to pick them and it's going to feel like a standard pin, meaning that the top fat part of the spool is at the shear line, and you give it a click and then you fall into a false set, and then you need to, you know, get the bottom part now over the shear line. But when that happens, the spool can be anywhere within the lock. So you're on the middle part of a spool somewhere inside the lock, and you just need to hunt that down and find the one that gives you counter rotation, and that's going to be the one you need to pick. In a lock full of spools, that's going to be a bit different because a lot of them are going to give counter rotation and we're going to have to pick them all. So now I'm going to go ahead and give a couple tips about picking the Masterlock 570 in particular, because this is full of spools and it is a pain in the butt. Okay, so normally you could use top or bottom of keyway tension, but what I found when I was picking this lock is that my first pin comes down pretty far, and that I'm not comfortable putting a bottom of keyway tensioner in there because it's not going to leave enough room for me to even get under that first pin, and I don't even know about all the other pins, but all I know is that first one I can't even get under it if I put a bottom of keyway tensioner in. So now I've got to use top of keyway no matter what, and normally I personally prefer top of keyway, so that's what I would have done anyways. But when you're trying to pick a lock, you want to take all those things into account and make sure you're using the right tools for the job, of course. So take a look at everything first and then make your decisions based on what you're seeing, you know, with your particular lock. It could be different on your lock. All right, so seeing that this is not a sprung core, when I turn the tensioner, I can actually remove it and the core stays exactly where I turned it. So that means if you happen to lose your tensioner in this picking of this lock, as long as you didn't counter rotate it first on accident, or you didn't pull it counterclockwise and drop all your pins should stay right where you left off. So as long as you're just gentle placing the tensioner back in, you'll be able to keep it right where you had it picked. So I'm going to be using just the slightest bit of tension. I'm going to turn it basically and just hold it there. I'm just holding it in the place so it doesn't, hopefully it doesn't pop out. That's all I'm doing with this lock, and you'll see why. So just using a standard hook, I go in and try to pick that first pin because it is binding hard. And if I check the others, that first pin is binding the hardest of all. And I can tell that by seeing how much, you know, everything's kind of jiggling just a tiny bit. But when I get to this first pin, it's just so binding. But I can't get this one picked. So I've tried several times and there's just no way to pick this pin. It's probably because every one of these pins inside is actually up to the point where they're all laying on the skinny parts of the spools. So I'm assuming that there are no tops or bottom of the spools right at the shear line. I can't get this pin to move one single bit. I'm assuming that all the pins are lying right at that point. So it's turned as far as it can go. Now, there is a way that you can manually counter rotate your tension until you can move the pin in question, and then you can set it a bit and then continue on picking. All right, so you can raise that pin up so that you can get a little bit and get it out of the way. But I'm not going to do that because it's a little bit tough, and if you're first learning how to pick spool pins, you're not going to be too knowledgeable on what to do with that. So I don't want to bring that into what we're going to do here. So in order to figure out what to do, I just kind of, I'm going to go through here and I'm going to touch each pin. And some are going to be, well, this one's actually springy. So I've got a springy pin. And now moving on to the next one, I've got one that's counter rotating quite a bit. You can see the tensioner moving. Even if it's ever so slightly, you can see that movement there. All right, and then the next one, again, moving a bit. The next one is moving a bit. All right, and this one moves a little bit, but not much. And you'll be able to tell more when you're pushing on them, you know, just by looking through the camera at what I'm doing. You can't tell how hard these are counter rotating, but I can tell just by the amount of pressure it's putting on my thumb here. So when I'm feeling it counter rotate, depending on the amount of pressure it's putting on my thumb, that's the difference that I can tell that you can't see. So when you're doing it yourself, you'll be able to see that difference. Excuse me. So basically all I'm going to do is find the one that's going to counter rotate the most. So the one that is counter rotating the most for me, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set that one instead of trying to set the first pin. And I'm just gently going to push up. It's going to counter rotate. You're going to see my tensioner counter rotate and then the pin will actually set and I will go back into my false set. Hopefully that's the goal. All right, so you saw it counter rotate, you heard the click, and then you saw it go right back into the false set. All right, and now eventually it's going to loosen up this first pin for me so I can actually pick it and I won't be stuck with just a stuck pin. So going through, going to do the same thing, something that gives me some counter rotation and that I'm able to pick, I'm just going to pick that. So I'm looking for something that's counter rotating the most. And again, that's something that you'll be able to feel on your tensioner when you're trying this yourself, you might not necessarily see it through the camera, but you're going to feel it when you're trying it. All right. So just moving through the lock. All right. All right. And evidently I picked the correct pin next because my lock just opened. I hope some of these tips help you, but I hope some of it, you know, is understandable, and I hope this does help you guys out. So, all right. Thank you for watching, and take care.